Hello and welcome to Oxy's Spring 2020 Fulbright U.S. Student Awards information session. My name is Jennifer Locke. I'm the Director of National and International Fellowships at Oxy, and I'm happy to join you today to talk about the Fulbright Award, some of the things it funds, and what the application process is like. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me after this presentation. I'm also happy to meet with students or alumni who are interested in learning more about the Fulbright, finding out what kind of awards within Fulbright might be best for you, or just working on your application. So please feel free to reach out after the presentation. So Fulbright was created by Congress in 1946 after World War II, and the idea was to strengthen the bonds between the U.S. and other countries. So the ultimate sort of mission of Fulbright is to increase mutual understanding between people of the U.S. and people of other countries through mutual exchange. It's important to know this because no matter what kind of Fulbright award you're applying for, you need to build this into your application in some way. You need to talk about how you're going to be interacting with others and creating this sense of mutual cultural exchange. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can do that through things like community engagement. It's administered by IIE right now, and overseas it's administered by national commissions and U.S. embassies. So because the Fulbright is funded by the U.S. government, you have to be a U.S. citizen by the time you're applying in order to be eligible. Other than that, you need to have a bachelor's degree or equivalent by the start of the grant, which means you have to be at least a senior at the time that you're applying. But you can also apply after you receive your bachelor's degree. And you also have to have no PhD at time of application. So you can apply for Fulbright to fund your dissertation research, for example. But after you receive your PhD, you move on to a different Fulbright Scholars Program instead of the Fulbright Student Program. You also need to be basically prepared for whatever kind of work it is that you're proposing to do. So some countries require that you have proficiency in the language of the host country. Others don't expect that right away. And you need to have sufficient preparation for the specific kind of work you're proposing to do. Fulbright also wants to support people who have had limited time in that country. What they mean by that is people who have not been working there already post their degree. So it's fine if you have studied abroad in that country or if you lived in that country when you were a child. All of that is still eligible. It's just they don't want to fund alumni who have already been in a particular country for say a year or more. You also need to have, as we mentioned before, an interest in cultural exchange. They're really going to want to see that that's sort of baked into your application and that you're not applying just to do research, but that you're applying to do research in a way that furthers mutual exchange. You also need to have ambassadorial qualities such as leadership, communication skills, and resourcefulness, in part because these will, again, help with the mutual exchange component, but also because they want to make sure that you'll be able to thrive while you're abroad, even in a fairly independent situation. All right, I want to talk about the major kinds of grants. So Fulbright grants fall mostly into two buckets or categories. So the first is research or study grants. There's over 950 of these in about 140 countries. And these fund all kinds of things, really. They fund independent research projects, so projects that you complete that maybe are related to your senior comps or summer research that you've done where you propose 9 or 10 months working on a particular question through a particular method in one country. That's one kind of grant that's funded. There's also study grants, which are basically scholarships for graduate school abroad. And not all countries offer these, but some do, and they're really great opportunities. There's also arts projects funding. So this might be, say, your chance to write a novel while abroad, but you need to be in a particular country in order to do research for that novel, or your chance to study music in a particular country or make a documentary. So all of those kinds of grants fall under the research study umbrella. The other big umbrella or category is English teaching assistantships, or ETAs, and I'll call them ETAs later in the presentation. So this kind of work is basically applying to a particular country so that you can be assigned to a school to help an English teacher at that school teach English and teach about American culture. There's over 1,200 of these awards right now in about 75 countries. And again, you will both be assisting in things like conversation development, perhaps their writing and reading, but also in maybe making presentations on U.S. culture or fostering cross-cultural conversations. So in this section, I'm going to talk about the basic steps for applying to a Fulbright. So we're going to talk about how do you decide what kind of grant you're going to be applying to and what country? How do you ask for recommendations? How do you write your application and essays? And get feedback and polish your drafts, and then interview and finalize your application. So the first thing you have to do is decide what kind of grant you're applying to. And this is important because every Fulbright cycle, you're only allowed to apply to one kind of grant to one country. So you really need to decide, am I applying to research this year, or ETA this year, or study? If you're applying for a research grant, you really want to make sure that you can make an argument for your relevant experience and skills that you would bring to that particular research project. So this is not the time to really pivot to a brand new field, but this is the time to really build off of the skills you've been developing at Oxy or at internships and jobs or off-campus research experiences, and be able to talk about how those skills will prepare you to hit the ground running with this project. Depending on the country, you may or may not need language skills, and also depending on the type of grant, the type of research that you're trying to do. So, if you need to do quite a bit of archival reading for your research proposal, or you need to be interviewing people, then you'll probably need a higher level of language skills than if you're in a lab that speaks English abroad. So you really want to make sure that you have language skills that match the kind of work you're applying to do. You also need to propose a compelling reason to conduct research in that country. That could be obvious, like you need to study a particular land formation, or you need to be immersed in a language that's only spoken in a particular region. That is a really good reason for having to be on the ground to do your research. But it could also be that you make an argument that you really want to work with a particular research group or a particular artist abroad, and they're doing work that's not being done in the U.S. for whatever reason. And that could be a really good reason to go to that country to do that research. But you need to have some sort of argument for why you want to go to that country. If you're applying for a study grant, then one thing to know is that your grant is conditioned upon you receiving admission to that graduate program. So you need to make sure that you meet all entrance requirements for that program, just like any other incoming grad student would. You also have to be able to express compelling reasons to do that master's degree in that country. So I was talking with someone at Fulbright who recommended that study applicants have an academic question in mind and articulate in their essay why they need to study that question in that country, in that particular program. And that can be sort of the bulk of your statement of grant purpose. If you're applying for an ETA, you have to have a real desire to teach. This doesn't have to be a long-term desire, like you don't have to be necessarily planning to be a teacher, but say you're going in a different career path, you need to express why you're really interested in spending this year immersed in teaching specifically. So it can't just sound like you want to travel, but it has to sound like you want to do the teaching work. You also have to show that you're mature and flexible, since they could really place you at any campus they want to. So you have to sort of demonstrate that you'd be able to thrive in whatever placement you receive. Some countries require ETAs to have a certain level of language skills or to have had prior teaching experience, so you want to make sure you match that. And you also have to have, again, compelling reasons to teach in that country. They want to see that you're interested in some aspect of that country and there's some clear reason for being there for a year. They say some of the weaker applications have essays where you could cross off the country name and replace it with another country and the essay would still make sense. So you want to make sure that that's not you. You want to make sure your essay is really tailored to that country in some way. All right, so speaking of what country you go to, I often get asked, well, how do I decide? I'm willing to go anywhere, or I'm willing to go anywhere in this region. So the first thing I would say is just think really carefully, do a lot of reflection, and think where would you like to travel and why. If you're going to be doing a research project, this might be driven more by your research than your personal interests. But if you're an ETA applicant, often it is driven by either your professional interests or sometimes it's by your personal heritage or by your personal cultural interests, places that you've traveled before and want to spend more time in, places that you've read about and want to explore at a deeper level. But usually if you start from a place of genuine interest, you'll have a stronger application than if you start somewhere else. You want to study that country's page on the Fulbright website to make sure you're a good fit for that country. Some countries have particular candidates in mind that have either particular majors, particular backgrounds, or experiences prior to Fulbright. So you want to make sure you meet that for any given country. And other countries have maybe field preferences for what kind of projects they'll support. So again, you want to make sure that you feel like your proposed work is in line with what that country is proposing. And then finally, if you're really undecided, then go to the statistics page on Fulbright's homepage to compare competition histories in different countries. So that's when you can see, okay, historically has it been a little bit easier to get into this country than another country? But I wouldn't make that your primary decision factor. Okay, I mentioned that you need recommendations. So everyone who's applying for Fulbright is required to get 3 recommendations. For a study research grant, this is going to be a letter of recommendation, much like a letter you would receive for graduate school. For an ETA, it's not a letter that you're asking for, but you're asking for basically a form. So your recommenders are asked to fill out a form talking about your maturity, your interest in teaching, your communication skills, that sort of thing. You can actually access this form on Fulbright's website before you decide who's going to write for you, which is really helpful. So you can see what kind of questions people are going to be expected to answer about you. I would say all of your recommendations need to be from professionals who know you well and can testify to your relevant skills. They have to be people who have in some way either taught or supervised you. At least one, no matter what you're applying for, should be an Oxy faculty member, but beyond that, it's a little bit flexible depending on your kind of grant. If you're applying for a research grant, I'd really strongly suggest you focus on asking professors or researchers in your field who have seen you do research. But if you're applying for an ETA, you have a few more options. So, pick a professor who knows you well and maybe a second professor. And that third person could be, say, someone who's seen you study abroad or someone who's seen you teach or who has seen you in a leadership role, something like that. So I'm happy to talk with you about who you're thinking would be a good fit, and we can help decide together who your recommenders could be. All right, so you're going to have to fill out the online application through Fulbright's site in order to apply. And this is true both for Oxy's internal process and for the national process. So in order to do that, make sure you're going through the Fulbright U.S. student program website. There's a bunch of different Fulbright websites out there, but this is the one you want. And you want to go under the applicants tab into the Fulbright online application. And this is currently run by Slate. That's their online platform. And it should open in early April. So as early as April, you can go in, create a login, and basically start working on the application components slowly and saving as you go. So the components in that online application are abstracts of different parts of your project and your community engagement plan. So this is where you can write sort of in short answers what you plan to do. Your personal information, educational history, work and volunteer history, that's really like a very short version of a resume, basically. And then finally, you'll upload transcripts. And I want to say just about transcripts really quickly. I often get asked if there's a minimum GPA for Fulbright, and there really isn't. No sort of published minimum GPA. I would say you probably should have at least a 3.0 to be competitive to apply. And certainly if you're applying, especially for a research or study grant, having a higher GPA is helpful. But they're really mostly going to be focusing on your application holistically and looking at your ability to do the work you're proposing. So you really want to have strong grades, related to the research or study field you're proposing to work in, and you want to have sort of enough to show that you have a solid level of responsibility and maturity for an ETA grant. But ETA positions are also going to look for your teaching experience, your volunteer leadership experience, and a much wider range of activities really that could prepare you to be a good teacher. The most important part of any Fulbright grant application are your 2 essays. These are not long essays, but they're very important. So I would spend most of your time here as you're preparing to apply. The first is that everybody writes a 1-page personal statement. This is where you connect Fulbright, what you're proposing to do with Fulbright, to your own personal trajectory. So how have you been preparing for this grant? Where are you going to go after this grant? And how does Fulbright prepare a kind of bridge, propose a kind of bridge for you between your past and your future? The statement of grant purpose varies a little bit by type of grant. So if you're applying for a research grant, you're going to write a 2-page research proposal here, where you answer what you'll research, with whom, using what methods, answering what questions. If you're applying for a study grant, you have 2 pages to, again, talk about what's your central question, why do you need to investigate that question in this country and through this program, and how will you approach the program? What courses might you take? What faculty do you hope to work with? What final projects might you do? That sort of thing. For an ETA, you only get 1 page, and this is really where you can talk about your approach to the year. So what are your teaching strategies? What are your strategies for opening up cross-cultural conversations? How are your past experiences with teaching, tutoring, group work, anything going to inform the kind of activities that you're bringing to this country? All statements of grant purpose should also include some sort of information about community engagement, how you're going to get involved outside of the lab or the classroom. And this does not have to be really extensive, especially since in your short answer, you'll have a chance to elaborate on this more. But I think it's always good to sort of mention how you hope to get involved outside of the classroom. Other requirements really vary by country and by type of grant. If and only if you're proposing to do research, then you need a letter of affiliation from a host in that country. So you need to contact a faculty member or some other appropriate host and get a letter from them saying that they would be willing to support your research, that they can help you get the resources and connections you need to get this research going. If language is required for your particular country, then you need to also get a foreign language evaluation form completed. This needs to be completed by a language professor, someone who can evaluate your current language skills. And you also complete a self-evaluation about that. There's also just special requirements that vary by country. One example I can think of is that if you're going to do research in Japan, you need to also write a version of your research proposal in Japanese and append that to your statement of grant purpose. So that is the kind of thing you would only know by looking at the country page. So make sure you spend some time looking at that page and getting to know it well. In terms of evaluation categories, what the committees are asked to look for when they get these piles of applications at the national level. They look, first of all, for the quality of the work that you're proposing, for like, is this a good project? Is this a good sort of set of teaching strategies? Like what is the sort of level of quality in your statement of grant purpose? Second, is the applicant qualified to do the work that they're proposing? And third, is the applicant a good fit with Fulbright's mission of mutual exchange? And this is, again, where you can rely on both your essays, but also on your recommenders to really sort of add to this and talk about your maturity, talk about your preparation for this kind of work. All right, so here are our 2020 deadlines. I'm actually pretty sure about these at this point, but they could be subject to change. The national deadline has been announced as October 6th, so that's what we're working with here. So the online application, as I mentioned, opens April 1st. We asked you to fill out a preliminary application through Oxy by June 26th. This is not a full application. This is a Google form indicating your interest in Fulbright. This is, and filling it out will basically help you get summer advising. So that's the first deadline to keep in mind. You can find that through Oxy's Fulbright website. If you just Google Oxy Fulbright, you'll find it. The second deadline is September 14th. This is the big deadline, big internal deadline. You need your complete application ready to go by September 14th. So you'll hit submit through Fulbright's portal. It will become visible on my end. I'll grab a PDF of it and then I'll unsubmit it so you can keep working on it. But we need your essays, your recommendations, everything by September 14th. Then I'll share those applications with the campus committee, and 3 members of the committee will interview you the following week, sometime around September 21st through 25th. At that interview, you'll be asked about your application so that we can fill out our evaluation of it. But also, we'll give you final advice for revising your application before the national deadline. And then you just have to go in and make final revisions and submit by October 6th, and you're done. I don't have a slide for this, but moving forward, the national committees convene around December and will announce usually in January whether you make it to the next level, the finalist level. And then it goes to the countries, and the countries make the ultimate decisions about the awards, usually sometime in March or April. Finally, I wanted to just conclude with information about further resources. So there's faculty and staff Fulbright advisors. The faculty advisors really become quite active in September once we get back to campus. They will, you'll be assigned a particular advisor, and they will be available to read drafts and to really help you get advice and sort of work through the process. You can certainly also always contact me over the spring, summer, anytime, really, in the fellowships office. My name is Jennifer Locke again, and you can find my email online. In September, we'll work with the Writing Center to do write-ins. So if you're on campus, you can stop by and work on drafts together in a community environment. It's really low-key. It's just stop by and write or get feedback on your drafts. And the faculty writing specialists are also available for appointments specifically for reviewing Fulbright drafts in September. So again, please feel free to ask me any questions. I'd love to meet with you in person or talk on the phone or email about your particular case and what you're thinking about. And I really, really look forward to working with you on your Fulbright applications and on drafts as you move forward. All right, thank you. Have a good day.